You are now listening to the Grio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
You know, if you use the term Karen or Becky, that's kind of like calling a white woman the N-word, or just calling somebody racist is kind of like using the N-word for white people. Well, not really though. That's why I want to welcome you to the Grio Daily, the only podcast that will ask, what is the N-word for white people? I'm sure you've heard this argument before, like, whether you're talking about Caucasian Americans or white women or Republicans or conservatives, or it doesn't even have to be racially tinged, right? Like everybody says saying this, fill in the blank, is like using the N-word. But I want to examine that today. For real, like what is the N-word for white people? Or for any group, what would we have to say that could hold such vitriol as the N-word, right? So first, to understand that, we would have to first examine the N-word. So the N-word is a weapon. It's like a knife. First of all, somebody listening to this podcast is saying, well, why can y'all use it and we can't? Well, if you walked into your house and somebody's standing there with a knife, if you know them and you see them with a jar of peanut butter and jelly in their hand, then you know what they're doing with the knife. But if you don't know them, if you don't know the reason they're using the knife, if you don't know the history of that knife, then you might think they're going to try to stab you. And the N-word is kind of like that. There are some people who use the N-word. I'm one of them. And I always say that the N-word is a curse word, right? Like, I don't go around calling everybody MFers, or I don't curse in front of my grandmother or in church. I use it in appropriate situations where I know that people will accept foul language. So when black people use it, whether you think it's wrong or not, right, you have to understand that there is some context for those people using it. So when you think about the N-word and the history of it, you have to understand that it has always been used negatively by white people, right? Like even the term negus, N-E-G-U-S, Ethiopian term for king or queen, is different from when white people say the hard R. Now that you understand it and how it is weaponized, we got to look at what is the equivalent for that word for white people. Now, first, the first thing that came to your mind is probably the word cracker. Well, cracker is not like negus, right? Cracker comes from different etymologies and people disagree, but the explanation I tend to lean on is a whip cracker. A person who cracks the whip, a slave overseer, they were called crackers, whip crackers. And so there is cultural and historical context behind that word. Even when it expanded to describe white people, you can understand that it has a cultural context and the meaning behind it, because you got to think about this, right? Like when you lived in a place like South Carolina during the history of enslavement, black people were the majority in South Carolina. So how did those black people not revolt? How did that white minority keep the black majority in line? Well, to those black people, all of the white people were whip crackers. May not necessarily have a whip in their house or carry it on their horse, but, the Constitution of the United States says that you have a constitutional duty to return or report an enslaved person who escaped. It's the Fugitive Slave Clause. So all of the white people in South Carolina were whip crackers. They were enslavers. They were the thing that stood between you and your freedom. It does not matter if you had a whip. To them, all white people were the danger. All white people were whip crackers. So cracker isn't like the same as the N-word, because all of the black people in America to white people were not enslaved. Most of the black people in America had no impact on the well-being or the freedom of white people. So it's kind of not the equivalent. Some people say, just saying the word racist or Karen. There's a big thing. Karen is like using the N-word. It's an insult for sure. But there are people named Karen. But while it is an insult, that insult connotes the delusion or the assumption of power over a Black person. Like, that's why people call white women Karens, is when their actions unreasonably suggest that they should have some kind of authority over a Black person. Like, just being white or just being a white woman, you won't be called a Karen. A Karen is a specific kind of white woman, or a white woman who acts in a specific way. Whereas I don't know a Black person who has never been called a hard R N-word. And so, yeah, Karen, Becky, none of that fits, right? So for there to be some kind of equivalent or some kind of equal racial slur or insult or pejorative for white people or for anybody, here's what we would have to have, right? We would have to have them be subjected to the disenfranchisement, inequality, violence, theft of their intellectual and physical work. They would have to be constitutionally enshrined as less than human. They would have to have that history that connotes socially, economically, and politically that they were less than the person who was using the slur. They would have to have most of the people like them subjected to that same kind of inhumanity. And they would need a word to connote all of that negativity, all of that violence, all of that inhumanity in just like 2 or 3 syllables. And then it would also have to connote that negativity to people who weren't enslaved. When you call a Black person the N-word, what it suggests is that, hey, because your people were subjected to that history, not only are my people superior to you, but everyone who bears your skin color is reduced to the worst thing that ever happened to a racial group on the history of this continent. That's what that word means. There can't be a word like that for white people if white people haven't had that done to them. Black people have never massacred white people. Black people have never subjected them, or a majority of them, to a inhumane or unequal treatment, right? They may have been individually subjected to inequality, but even being white didn't subject them to that inequality. They have never had to worry that their children and their grandchildren and their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren would be subjected to that inequality. They never had to worry that their mama and their grandmama and their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmama was being subjected to a slur just because someone called it at you. When they call you the N-word, they talking about your mama, your grandmama, your granddaddy. They talking about all of the Black people who came before you, all of the Black people who look like you. They talking about your children. And there just can't be a word. Well, okay, so maybe there is one term that is the equivalent of the N-word for white people, and that is the term white people. Because when you say white people, it connotes all of that inhumanity to white people. To us, it ain't a slur, because white people could just say Black people, but the N-word is a specific choice that's used to hurt somebody. It is the knife. It is the bullet. It is the whip. It is the hangman's noose. When you see these articles about people going into work and their coworkers have hung a noose, that connotes a history that conjures up the images of the people who were slaughtered by white people. And there has never been a term that can define that, because when you say anything, when you say "au fait," that was an old word in the 70s, y'all gotta look that up, or cracker, or slave master, or racist, right? There is a loophole for white people, right? They can always say that ain't me. But when white people use the word N-word, you know specifically they're talking about all the Black people. You have been heaped on the pile of insignificant inhumanity. And that's why there is no equivalent to the N-word. The only equivalent to the N-word is the N-word. And that's why you also have to download this podcast. That's why you have to subscribe to it. That's why you have to download that Grio app. And that's why you got to tell a friend. And that's also why we leave you with a Black saying. And today's Black saying is the N-word for white people is, we'll let you know when we figure that one out. We'll see you next time on the Grio Daily. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star review, download the Grio app, subscribe to the show, and share it with everyone you know. Please email all questions, suggestions, and compliments to podcast@thegrio.com.
You are now listening to the Grio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
I'm Torre. Join us for crazy true stories about stars who I really hung out with, like Snoop, Jay-Z, Prince, Kanye, and the time I got kidnapped by Suge Knight. Don't miss my animated series Star Stories with Torre from the Grio Black Podcast Network.